Hi, I'm Arun George, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In today's episode, we're looking at how the BJP is trying to woo a minority in Kerala to make political inroads. We're also taking a look at who the chief guest will be at India's next Republic Day celebrations. But first, we're analyzing the first signs that the government might have potential bias for national airline Air India. Industrialist J.R.D. Tata founded Tata Air Services in 1932, which was a mail carrier. He flew the first flight from Karachi to Mumbai himself. It was later renamed Tata Airlines, and the airline's first domestic flight was in the late 1930s. In 1953, the government purchased a majority stake from Tata to make it India's national airline. However, as it stands, the airline, that has since been renamed Air India, is neck deep in debt. It had a net debt of 58,000 crore at the end of the financial year 2018-19. It's currently operational thanks to government bailouts. Previous attempts by the government to sell its stake in the airline have been completely unsuccessful. To make the stake sale more attractive, the government announced it was prepared to sell all its stake, that is a 100% stake sale, in Air India and Air India Express Limited. It also said a potential bidder could choose the amount of debt they were willing to absorb as part of the deal. After making these changes, the government received at least 2 expressions of interest from potential buyers. The potential buyers will now need to submit physical bids by the 29th of December, and the qualified interested bidders will be intimated on the 5th of January 2021. But how did Air India end up needing rescuing? What are the advantages for whoever does end up buying Air India? And what are the disadvantages? To answer these questions and more, we're now speaking with Pranav Mukul, who writes on the aviation sector for the Indian Express. Pranav, to start with, could you talk about when and why Air India started to struggle?
So, basically there are a number of factors that various experts point out why Air India became a loss-making airline. One is the constant interference from the government on how to operate, and that is one of the main factors. The second factor is the merger of Air India, which was the international airline that the Indian government owned, and Indian Airlines, which was the domestic airline that was state owned. The merger of these two airlines into Air India was also riddled with a lot of small problems that ended up making it into a huge struggle for the airline's operations. So there are various factors that have played over the years. There was also a financial restructuring plan for Air India that some experts point out didn't turn out the way it should have.
So then Air India begins to struggle and the government decides to disinvest its stake in it, which is basically sell its stake off. But it's been on sale since 2017. Why did it not find any buyers?
It's not actually accurate to say that Air India began to struggle and the government decided to sell it off. There was a financial restructuring plan that was put in place in 2012 where the government tried to revive the airline from the form it was in. Other than that as well, the plan to disinvest Air India has been on the government's table for a long time now. It's been almost a decade, more than a decade in fact, since the government has had the first thoughts to sell the airline, because there was a debate as to whether it makes sense for government to be in the airline business. Because what's also interesting, what private airlines point out, is that a government player being in the competitive landscape skews that landscape a bit, because ultimately the government will continue to fund the losses, and that really makes it untenable for private airlines to carry on their operations. On actively trying to sell it, yes, the government's pure active attempts have been on since 2017, where special alternate mechanism was formed, which was basically a group of ministers that decided on how to disinvest the airline. The first formal documents inviting expressions of interest from interested investors was put out in 2018. But at the time, the government, what it wanted to do was part with just 76% of its stake and still wanted to hold on to 24% of stake in Air India. And that was something that was not looked at too keenly by potential investors. So during the 2018 attempt, not a single bid for Air India was received. And following that, the government made some changes to make the airline more attractive.
So One thing is also, you mentioned this fact that government funding an airline, and there's a lot of debate about whether India should have a national airline. You've seen it in times of crisis where airlines, are used by the government to kind of do things that maybe a private player wouldn't be too keen on doing. But if it does have advantages, why does the government not want to run this airline anymore?
There's also the question of the taxpayers' money being used to fund an airline operation. And as far as the point of the airline being available in crisis times, a lot of private airlines have also stepped up in crisis time. There have been certain evacuations from the Middle East where private airlines like Jet Airways, which is now defunct, they have also stepped in certain evacuation. We have seen during COVID times as well, private airlines have operated Vande Bharat flights as well to repatriate citizens from outside, including some destinations in the Middle East or Southeast Asia. So private airlines, they have stepped up, but why the government doesn't want to do it, that's a whole broad debate as to whether, there are number of industries where there's a debate on whether the government should be there or not. So airline industry is obviously one of them. And, that's a decision that the government took to not be in this business anymore and conduct a strategic disinvestment of the airline.
So now you've got an airline that's to be sold, but this is perhaps in a sense like a terrible time, right? Because all airlines have taken a horrible beating thanks to the pandemic and travel being hit. And how badly has that hit Air India right now?
So Air India, like any other airline, it has the basic structure of an airline is that it's a fixed costs model. So there are certain costs that you are going to incur. You do have an aircraft, so you have to pay lease for it. You have to maintain that aircraft. There are high costs that an airline will incur. Doesn't matter whether it's operating or not. And on the other hand, the revenues are perishable. Unlike, say, manufacturing of whatever, I mean manufacturing of cars or manufacturing of garments, if a garment is not sold today due to the lockdown or whatever, it will get sold tomorrow or the day after. But once an airline seat is unsold, it remains unsold forever, so that revenue is basically non-recoverable. You lost that revenue. So to that extent, Air India also has been hit as much as most other airlines across the globe have, for an airline that size.
Then that also raises the question as to then why is there sudden interest in the airline now with multiple expressions of interest?
So, while the COVID period has been the worst period for the airline industries in history, but there is obviously going to be a certain recovery. It's the basic principle that, if something is suffering or if something is under stress, that's probably the best time to go ahead and buy it because you'll get a good price for it. And obviously, there's no study or there's no report that is sort of pessimistic about India's air transport growth. It is bound to grow several fold over the next couple of years and even decades. So that's a long term bet that any investor wanting to invest in Air India would be making right now.
And could you talk a bit about who all have bid and what are the advantages and disadvantages they have currently?
So what we have learned is there have been two expressions of interest, which is basically potential investors expressing that yes, we are interested in buying this airline. And after this, the government will decide who all, basically which one of these qualify to place an actual financial bid. One of them is Tata Group, incidentally, which was the founder of Air India, the airline, more than 70 years ago. And the government then nationalized the airlines, taking it out of the Tata Group's hands, and it could become a homecoming for Tata Group if they emerge as the winner. Currently, Tata Group, they operate two airlines in India, both joint ventures. One joint venture is with Singapore Airlines, which operates under the Vistara brand, and the second joint venture is with the Malaysian low-cost airline group Air Asia. And the airline that operates with Air Asia is obviously Air Asia India. What Tata Group wants to do is consolidate all its airline brands under one brand. The second investor that has submitted an expression of interest is a consortium between a group of Air India's employees, which include some board members as well, some sitting board members, and a financial investor by the name of Interrupts Incorporated, which is a New York-based financial investment company.
You also spoke about how the government has been trying to disinvest it, and this is perhaps at worst period to disinvest an airline in a sense. So, would the government effectively stand to lose more now if it disinvests the airline right now, given then, say, even maybe a year or two earlier?
No, again, see, if you take a bigger picture for government, also the longer it continues to hold on to the airline, the longer it continues to fund its losses. So, the airline is not making the governments any profit. To that extent, from the government's point of view, it's the sooner it gets privatized, the sooner it gets, disinvested, it's better for them. So, I mean, I think that's the view that the government would have taken on this.
And the question is, what does a prospective buyer, like anybody who basically ends up potentially buying it, what are the gains for them from buying Air India, which is so steeped in debt?
So, as far as the debt component is concerned, what the government has done is allowed a potential investor to bid on the basis of enterprise value, which is basically the assets plus the debt component combined. So, earlier the government wanted an investor to take on a certain portion of debt along with the airline, but that was far less attractive for any investor because a new investor would have to clear that debt and then invest more to operationalizing the airline. But what the assets that Air India brings to the table is it has accumulated some of the prime slots and routes over the years. So slots at, for example, say London's Heathrow Airport or New York's JFK Airport, they are very scarcely available in this time. So for any airline investor to have those prime slots, which are basically, profit making high quality slots, that is something that a new airline investor would be getting. For example, for the Tata Group, had it not been for COVID, it would have been very difficult or very expensive for Vistara to have gained slots at London's Heathrow Airport. So, other than that, the airline also owns or leases more than 150 aircraft, including wide body aircraft, which are huge assets for an airline. It already has those. It doesn't have to place a new order and wait for new aircraft to be delivered.
But then there are also challenges, right? Which if you acquire Air India, could you talk about what the challenges would be if someone does buy Air India?
So one, the challenges would be to cut down the size of the airline because currently at whatever size it is operating, it is loss making. So losses can be controlled in either of two ways. Either you increase revenues or you cut down on costs. Other than that, when you compare Air India to other global airlines, the number of employees that it's operating at, the number of aircraft that it has, and you sort of compare it to the losses that it makes, that's a huge thing. So the first decision that a new investor will have to take is how to cut down on the losses so that they're not affected by the same problem that the government has been for so many years.
Before we get to the next segment, I just wanted your quick attention. One of the big reasons people say that they like this show is because it helps them understand the news better. It provides them with the context they need to see the bigger picture. And there's perhaps no other place that does this better than the Indian Express's Explained section. We on Three Things refer to the section regularly, and it helps us make this show. If you're a regular reader of the newspaper, you know how useful the Explained section can be, especially when you're looking for in-depth analysis by the right experts. You can log into indianexpress.com/explained and access their coverage 24/7. Explained by the Indian Express, where news that matters is explained by experts who know the subject. Now, back to the show. The BJP has never had much of a political presence in the southern state of Kerala. It has never won a Lok Sabha seat from the state. It has never won more than one assembly seat in the state. Its recent big push to expand its presence in the state will be clear when the results of local body elections in Kerala will be released on Wednesday. As the party tries to grow in the state, it's attempting various strategies. In the next segment, our producer Joshua Thomas speaks with Associate Editor Liz Mathew about one such strategy: to win over church leaders in the state.
Hello, listeners. As Arun mentioned, in this segment, we'll be going into the BJP's current Christian outreach drive to grow its base in Kerala. Now, even though this might seem uncharacteristic of the BJP, This has actually been a long time in the making. I spoke to Associate Editor Liz Mathew, who covers the BJP, to get some perspective on her story.
See, BJP is a party which always continued to explore its possibility of spreading its wings in the places or in the regions where it has not been able to do so far. We have seen it in Telangana, how the Congress was the dominating party and how the BJP has replaced all other parties as the opposition to TRS. And in the recent Hyderabad corporate body elections, we have seen that. In Kerala, BJP sees it as a fertile place because the RSS is already very active there, and RSS has its most effective and active shakhas there in the state. Though BJP feels that only political utilization of that support base is that what BJP wanted to do. But Kerala's political scene is very peculiar. It's like, CPM-led LDF and Congress-led UDF alternatively come to power. So it has tried and tested the coalitions effectively for decades. People in Kerala, politically very sensitive and also very active, they have not yet felt that BJP is a party that can rule the state or be the alternative party there. So that was the issue with the BJP. But at the same time, although BJP could not make much inroads in terms of electoral gains in the assembly and parliamentary elections, it has been over the years been gaining ground in the local body elections, and not just in the Hindu dominated area, but also in the areas where the Christians were influential, like, the Marthoma Christians. Even the RSS has publicly appreciated the Syrian Catholics, saying that they are Indian Christians, so they are part of India. So there is a public acknowledgement of the community also there. Now what BJP is trying to do is to make use of their sympathy or an affection or affinity to the RSS or a Hindu organization into a political gain.
Kerala is a bit tricky for the BJP because if the BJP only got the Hindu vote, they would not be able to get a majority.
Also, it's a unique state. The BJP can't, like in other states, BJP cannot just simply rely on the consolidation of Hindu votes in that state because of the peculiar demography in the state. The state has almost 27% of Muslims and almost 19% of Christians, which makes more than 45% of the total population is minority. So BJP has to have another community with them to gain power electorally in the assemblies or in parliament election. But now, what is actually giving them more hope? The party has tried to get the Christian community and also a Christian party. They try to get the Kerala Congress M, which is known as a Christian party or which has very deep influence in the Christian dominated or influential areas. But recently that party has joined the CPIM-led LDF. So BJP has lost that hope also. Now what remains for them is to woo the community or the church leadership. And for that, they want to make use of a peculiar situation there, which is, the Christian community or at least the community leaders have been feeling some kind of disenchantment with the Congress-led UDF, which it has been supporting for long because of the increasing influence of IUML, Indian Union Muslim League. It's a party which is very popular and also very influential in the areas where the Muslims are populated, and it is known as a Muslim party. So its influence in the UDF in the last election and all, the IUML won more number of seats. So it has considerable influence in the UDF, and UDF decisions will always be very intensely influenced by the IUML. So it is a situation the Christians do not want to happen because, the Christian community for long, it has been dominating the health and also the education scene. But what happened is, in the last few years, the Muslim community and its people have got education institutions and, an increasing influence of the community and its people, which has created some kind of disenchantment or some kind of, I would say, even a jealousy.
Now, in the article that Liz wrote for the paper, she mentions a person by the name of Sridharan Pillai. Sridharan Pillai happens to be the current Mizoram governor, but he was also the former BJP Kerala unit president. He is one of the key players in catalyzing the BJP's efforts to win over the church leaders in Kerala.
See, Sridharan Pillai is from an area where the Mathoma Christians are dominated, where that community has an affinity towards the BJP, and BJP also has, which is like mutual. Sridharan Pillai had good relationship with the community leader. Now he's the governor of Mizoram. So recently there was an incident where Sridharan Pillai's one book was released by Governor Arif Muhammad Khan, and it was handed over to the Catholic Church's eminent personality, Alan Cherry. He's a cardinal. So Cardinal Alan Cherry has received the book from the governor. Before that, there was a meeting in November 1st week. Sridharan Pillai was invited by some church leaders and had a dinner meeting in which they had expressed some kind of grievances. One is that they claimed 80% of the minority scholarship which is given to the state, it goes to the Muslim students. Ideally, the Christians should have got 40%, but Muslims are getting 80%. This was one of their claim and the grievance. Another issue or concern, quote unquote concern, they have raised is the increasing number of Christian girls, quote unquote, lured by the Muslim boys and, getting into. So they are pointing out of the 21 people who have joined IS, many of them were Christian girls who are kind of converted by the Muslim boys. So this, they are putting it as another grievance. But to be very honest, before complaining, they should also look at how many of the Christian students are actually asking for the minority scholarships and how many of them are denied, which the number, I am sure it is not as high as 80% or something. And also, just like any other community, a section of the church leaders feel that is also because of the economic influence of the Muslims. They feel that they hold on the state, and the influence in the state's political scenario and the social scenario, it is diminishing and they are getting replaced by the Muslims. This fear is also there. And other than that, in the population, the number, they say they are citing a study by CSDS saying that, by 2050, the Christian population will be reduced into half and the Muslims will be almost triple of their size. I don't think that many experts would agree to this demand. Kerala is known for its coexistence of communities. And so far, it has given opportunities and space for different communities to grow and different people to grow. But obviously, this situation, it is also influenced by the global factors of general Islamophobia, because the church is closely linked to the Western world, and even Catholic Church is controlled by Vatican. And also, we know all these things also play a role in this kind of apprehensions and resentments and also fears. So this is a time BJP feels that they should cash in on. And this is a time that they should influence the church leaders. So BJP is facilitating, and a delegation of church leaders are expected to meet Prime Minister Narendra Modi in the coming days. And they are expected to give this memorandum in which they mention about this minority scholarship and also about the alleged love jihad issue. So BJP obviously as a party which would try to make use of any opportunity to expand its reach there. So they are trying to use this opportunity.
At this point, it must be noted that the BJP in this instance is trying to win over the church leaders. But do these church leaders actually exert any influence when it comes to their own communities?
Church leadership in the past also tried to influence the voters. There were times that the church, after the holy masses, they would even give a hint that who should they vote. But that time is over. That, the voters in the state can be influenced very deeply by the church leadership. The community leaders have a very respected and very influential role, but it doesn't usually affect the people's voting patterns. So that is the trend we have so far seen. It is not so easy for any party to influence the voters or a particular community through the community leaders in the state so far.
I'm pleased that Prime Minister Johnson has invited Prime Minister Modi to join the UK-hosted G7 summit next year. And Prime Minister Johnson has also gratefully accepted the very generous invitation to attend India's Republic Day celebrations in January, which is a great honour.
That's UK's Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab, who is in India for diplomatic talks, confirming that UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson will be the chief guest at India's Republic Day celebrations in January 2021. Raab also said that Johnson would invite India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi to the Group of Seven Nations meeting that is scheduled to be held in the UK in 2021. The Indian Express had first reported India's attempts through informal channels to get Johnson to attend the Republic Day celebrations. Johnson will be the sixth chief guest from the UK at India's Republic Day celebrations. He will be the first British Prime Minister since John Major in 1993 to be the chief guest at the event. However, India may have Republic Day celebrations on a smaller scale in 2021 due to the pandemic, much like the Independence Day celebrations earlier this year. You were listening to The Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Arun George, and as always, was edited and mixed by our producer, Joshua Thomas. Before we go, here's another reminder to check out Indian Express's Explained page. You can log on to indianexpress.com/explained and find in-depth analysis by the right experts. It has everything you need to know to understand the news better and see the bigger picture. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.